Mr. Secretary, as you know, last Congress I introduced the Taiwan Travel Act, and President Trump signed it into law last March. The intention of this legislation was to allow our high-level officials to go to Taipei and to allow their high-level officials to come here to the United States, including Washington. In fact, as I had mentioned to you when you were here last time, I would absolutely advocate President Tsai addressing a joint session of Congress here in Washington, D.C. Sometime in the not-too-distant future. As you know, you and I were elected together back in 2010, historic 2010 class, majority makers, and you've moved on. It was your first time, my second time, but you moved on to, I guess, some would argue bigger and better things, but you're now Secretary of State. And as you may know, I was first elected back in '94, and a member of my class back then, Sam Brownback, was here for a while, and then he moved up and on to the Senate, although we don't necessarily think that's up on this side of the building. Of course, then he became governor of Kansas. And the reason I bring Sam up is not only were we classmates, but he's now ambassador at large for international religious freedom, and he did visit Taipei recently, and I would certainly encourage more visits like that. So I guess my question, Mr. Secretary, would be, do you think that the full implementation of the Taiwan Travel Act would improve U.S.-Taiwan relations, and can the people of Taiwan count on you to advocate for further implementation of that, I think, very important legislation, the Taiwan Travel Act?
So I think it's important to consider all of these things in the context of the challenges from China. You've seen what we've done with respect to Taiwan. It was just in the past few days that we sailed through the Straits, the United States Department of Defense through the Straits.
The gentleman, if everybody will hold. Excuse me. You are out of order. Okay. We'll hold for a minute.
Mike Pompeo said that the Iranian people would have to choose between eating food and their own government. That's what the point of the station is. It's to starve people. AnswerCoalition.org. Hands off Venezuela. Hands off Iran. Hands off China.
All right. The chair reminds all members of the audience that any manifestation of approval or disapproval of proceedings is in violation of the rules of the House and its committees. And if there are any further disruptions, the police will be called back to remove the person or persons from the hearing room.
Mr. Chairman, the Secretary was in the process of answering a question. I would ask that our time be restored.
Yes, absolutely.
I appreciate that. I would also note that the, I guess I'll use the term gentleman who just interrupted this meeting was neither from Taiwan nor the PRC and had nothing to do with my question or the Secretary's answer. So, Mr. Secretary, if you could continue.
I appreciate you stopping people from disapproval, Mr. Chairman. If there's approval, you can let them go on. So this is a very serious matter. The Taiwan Travel Relations Act is an important piece of legislation. You've seen our administration do a great deal to implement that. I'm sure there's more to follow. I don't want to get too far out ahead of what we're doing, but make no mistake about it, we understand the importance of that relationship, and more importantly, we have taken a much fuller view than previous administrations. This is not partisan. It goes back to Republicans and Democrats alike, of the concerns about the risk that China presents to American wealth creation and our continued democracy.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate that. I'd like to move on at this point to Burma. A year and a half ago, the Burmese military drove the Rohingya out of the Rakhine state through a campaign of killings and rapes and burning of villages and some of the most horrific and unspeakable crimes that we'd seen on this globe in a long, long time. We all appreciated when then Secretary Tillerson, your predecessor, dubbed these atrocities as ethnic cleansing. Now, as you know, ethnic cleansing is a powerful message, but it doesn't have legal weight. And since 2017, overwhelming evidence has come out that clearly shows that the Burmese military committed crimes against humanity. Even the department's own investigation into these atrocities came to similar conclusions. Several entities, including the House, have concluded that these crimes constitute genocide. The State Department has not made any legal pronouncement at this point beyond ethnic cleansing. Given all the evidence available to you, could you comment today if you're ready to conclude or where you are in determining whether the crimes committed against the Rohingya by the Burmese military did constitute at least crimes against humanity?
Yeah, let me try and address that. You referenced the report that the State Department did. It was amazing work by some really talented State Department officers to go out and collect that data. I think the data speaks for itself in terms of the horrific nature of what took place there. With respect to making this legal determination, I'm not prepared to provide you an answer today. Know that we are still looking at it. Frankly, that I am still looking at that more specifically. My objective here is to get a really good outcome, to change this behavior, then to hold those responsible accountable. I want to make sure that we do this in a thoughtful way. Yeah. I get the messaging that takes place when a Secretary of State makes these designations. I value that, and it is important. But I think we'd all agree the most important thing we can do is get both accountability and behavioral change, and that's what the State Department's working to do. We are still actively considering how to approach those conclusions.
Thank you very much. Georgia and Ukraine both face intense continued pressure from Putin. Both have territory illegally under Russian control. Despite the risks, Georgia and Ukraine and really many Eastern European countries actively pursue pro-Western policies. Could you describe how the President's budget enhances our support for these two critical partners? So
you've seen real tangible ways we've done in Ukraine, providing defensive items to the Ukrainian people. We've provided intelligence assistance. I saw that in my previous role before I was the Secretary of State. You've seen our efforts all across the world, in Ukraine and Georgia included, to push back against Russian efforts to interfere when elections are approaching, as we are in Ukraine today. There are many elements. And I was speaking about things mostly that the State Department, Department of Defense were involved in. There are elements all across the United States government determined to help the Georgian people who are very pro-American and share our understanding of the way that region ought to operate.
Thank you. And I've only got 30 seconds, so I want to conclude on North Korea. I want to applaud both you and the President and his team for being willing to walk away from a bad deal in Hanoi. It reminded me a lot of a president who has, up to this point, was my most respected president, Ronald Reagan, walking away from Gorbachev in Reykjavik. So thank you for doing that. You know, it's easy to enter into a bad deal and you get some press that's positive, but you were willing to walk away. God bless you for doing it. Keep the sanctions up and let's denuclearize that peninsula. Thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for being here.